it may seem odd to want to include the immune system as part of the circulatory system, but it is a system within a system. The immune system depends so heavily on the functioning of the circulatory system that you can't really separate it. When we think of the immune system itself, we think of it in terms of lines of defense. And there are actually 3 lines of defense. This video is only going to deal with the first 2 of these 3. I'll mention the third one, but I'm going to leave it for a second video because it's too big of a topic to include right away. Our first line of defense in the immune system is our skin. Our skin is a covering all over our body, and the outside of the skin is actually dead cells. And that's a huge advantage to have dead cells out here because things don't want to infect dead cells. So if there are viruses or bacteria or pathogens of some sort come in contact with our skin, they can be brushed off or washed off and never cause any infection. So the skin is our first line of defense. Added to the fact that it's dead cells, the skin has hair on it, even tiny, fine little hairs. And what they do is tend to trap things as well and prevent them from coming in direct contact with the skin. So again, it allows them to be brushed and washed off more easily. Even though our skin covers the entire outside of our body, there are openings in our skin into our body. And think right away of noses, the nostrils, the mouth, ear openings. These are protected. We breathe in. This is a huge part of it. We breathe in, and pathogens can be in the air. But we have nose hairs, and our nose produces mucus. It gets caught in the nose hairs, the mucus, and it can be removed. So again, the line of defense, the first one is our skin. It's basically a covering of dead cells, has hair, mucus that protects openings, but even so, there are times when other things get into our bodies. And that's why we have other lines of defense. Should something get past our skin, get past the hair and the mucus in our nose, for example, and get deeper within the body, we have another 2 lines of defense to deal with it. The second line of defense is white blood cells. In fact, the third line of defense is also white blood cells, but it's like I say, it's a more complicated part of the story. White blood cells are known as leukocytes. The suffix "cytes" means cell, leuko means white. They are unique among blood cells because they release proteins. These proteins are known as immunoglobulins. We had hemoglobin, we know globulins. These are all proteins. These particular ones are proteins of the immune system. If we tried to represent a white blood cell, perhaps the best known representation of it, if we try to illustrate it, would be something that looks like this, or something like this. They are larger cells than red blood cells, perhaps twice the size of red blood cells, and their nucleus is not a little spherical shape like you'd expect to see in most cells. This nucleus here is called multi-lobed. They don't all have multi-lobed nucleuses, but of the 5 general types of white blood cells, some of them certainly do. Another feature which is common in white blood cells are, under the microscope, visible granules. So some of them are known as granulocytes. So like I said, this is probably the most commonly recognized picture of a white blood cell. But in fact, it doesn't represent all of them. It represents the most common one. Of the white blood cells, there are 5 types. Basophils, I'll just list the names of them first. Eosinophils, Neutrophils, Monocytes, and Lymphocytes. Notice the endings of these names now. Basophils, Eosinophils, Neutrophils, all end in the same "phil." That refers to the fact that those ones are all granulocytes. So this is also a granulocyte, and so is this one. Eosinophils and neutrophils are multi-lobed in terms of their nucleus. This one here typically represents this one, because this is by far the most abundant type of white blood cell. The way they combat infection primarily is because they're phagocytic. These cells will actually change shape and conduct phagocytosis. So if they encounter something which is potentially harmful, the cells will actually change shape and wrap around it. If you look at that a split second later, that thing which was outside is now inside in a little vacuole, and these granules can dispense with it. That's phagocytosis. Of these 5 types of white blood cells, the ones which are capable of that action are basophils, but basophils have another function as well: eosinophils, neutrophils, and monocytes. Those ones are all somewhat phagocytic. This one is known to be the most phagocytic, or it's the primary one in terms of phagocytosis. So its action looks like that, and we'll mention that coming up here. The neutrophils, most abundant, don't have to say anything more about those. The basophils and eosinophils, we'll mention something about them in a quick second here. The third line of defense, just to introduce it now, deals with lymphocytes and monocytes. I'll mention monocytes a little bit here, but also monocytes in the next video with lymphocytes. While we're listing types of white blood cells, though, it's probably useful for me to mention that there are 3 kinds of lymphocytes themselves. There are NK cells, there are T cells, and there are B cells. These are with the third line of defense, and so does the action of monocytes refer to the third line of defense. The two that I want to explore a little bit more right now, though, are basophils and eosinophils. And I think I can erase all of this. We don't need that. So basophils play a role when you get an infection of some sort. So let's suggest perhaps that this is your skin, and your first line of defense is that your skin is quite impervious. Things don't get through your skin. So let's just say it's your arm. And it may come in contact with all sorts of things which are potentially harmful, and you wash them off, or they get stuck in the hair, and they get brushed off, or whatever happens to them. But let's suppose something comes along and pierces the skin and introduces into the system, into your body, some things which aren't supposed to be there. Now these things could be a pathogen, which is a disease-causing entity. It could be bacteria. It could be virus. It could also be perhaps an allergen. So if you're allergic to something, think maybe even in terms of a bee sting. A bee comes along and pierces your skin and introduces some chemical into your body which you're allergic to. This is where the basophils come in. The basophils actually release histamine. Histamine is one of these immunoglobulins that makes the capillary beds leaky. So if the capillary beds leak, more fluid gets pushed out of the capillaries and more fluid is introduced into this area. It causes swelling, or we could call it edema. People who are very allergic to bee stings, for example, they may get a big swollen finger, or it'll cause some swelling that in effect dilutes the allergen, or dilutes the pathogen, the bacteria. The effect of this is to dilute it. It delivers more fluid to the area. The chemical that's causing the problem is dispersed in a greater amount of fluid. The second thing that happens in this particular situation is the role of the eosinophils. When histamines are released, the eosinophils are activated. And remember that eosinophils are also granulocytes. I mean, these are granulocytes. There's the immunoglobulin right there. These are activated and they release what we're going to call cytotoxins. Cytotoxins, there's a variety of different type of immunoglobulins. What the cytotoxins are, again, they're proteins that are toxic to cells. So they're going to go out and kill whatever cells are out there. And sometimes they release cytotoxins. They're also phagocytic. So they'll engulf it and take it away. Basophils are a little bit phagocytic, not nearly as much though. So over a period of time, if you have this sort of a situation where you've got something injected into your body, a pathogen or an allergen, or whatever it is, it gets diluted and removed like this. The only thing you have to consider after this situation is what happens to the extra fluid here. The extra fluid is removed by the lymphatic system. It will eventually drain excess fluid. And over time, like I say, the swelling will go down. This thing here is known as the allergic response. It's one of the body responses as part of the immune system. To return to the list of 5 types of white blood cells, monocytes and neutrophils do a lot of interesting work. The monocytes are quite like an amoeba. They are able to travel around in the body, and they actually can leave the bloodstream. They get out of the blood and they can actually travel through tissues. And when they do, they become larger cells known as macrophages. Macrophages, large cells. The role of the macrophage has to do with the third line of defense. So I'm just going to mention that here, and we'll return to it in the next video. The other type that I already mentioned, the neutrophils, I don't have anything further to add to them, but just to complete the list, neutrophils are the most abundant, and they're phagocytic. The lymphocytes are the ones that we have to look at yet, and that's the third line of defense. Thanks very much.